My name's Terry Ray. I'm not going to stand in front of the screen the whole time, I promise you. Terry Ray, I'm the Senior Vice President for and a Field CTO for Imperva. This presentation is not about necessarily Imperva. It's not a product presentation. There'll be a little bit maybe at the end, but and by the way, outside it says this is about demystifying data security, data protection. That is what this is about. I just forgot to change the slide, so that's on me. But you're in the right place. We're going to talk about today about data security, about data protection, about data privacy. You're not going to come out of here a privacy expert, but you will come out of here with some questions you can ask yourself at the end to say, do I feel like I have a really good handle on data security in my program? And there's certain questions you need to ask yourself, and you have to be really honest with yourself when you answer those questions. And we'll talk a little bit about that as we jump into it. So let's go ahead and get started. So there are some small words up here. You don't need to read them. If they make this available to everybody, it's totally public, it's fine. I'll read a little bit to you, but I'm not really a slide reader. This will be the only one we do a little bit of it. The fact is data is perceived as the new oil. It is critical. It's one of the only things that someone can expose or someone can take, and you're never getting it back. Once it's out, it's out. The volume of records taken every year is increasing by about 200%. Customers with uncertain expertise or users or DBAs or data SecOps or data ops, however you want to do it, or DevOps, are moving data from place to place to place, using data in many different ways, sometimes with the knowledge of security, sometimes and often without the knowledge of security. Because of that, there are over 150 global cyber regulations, compliance, privacy, the name of this booth, right? Reasons why organizations didn't necessarily do the right thing or didn't do the right thing well enough, so now there's regulatory compliance on top of it. Now, I'll jump down here a little bit. 76% of cybersecurity leaders face a skill shortage. That's why, likely, you could jump out of your job today and have another job tomorrow in cybersecurity, in IT, in big data, in data science, and otherwise. Skills are very, very hard to come by. So we're finding a lot of vendors try to augment those skills with automation and technology. That's kind of what we're here to talk about a little bit today. And the fact is when we think about the modern data security requirements, those things that organizations have today as a requirement around protecting their data is very different than it was only 5 years ago, much less 20 years ago when I started this. So I've got two examples here. These are real examples. They're not really attacks so much, they were, but we'll dig into it a little bit. So this is about files. The one thing you should note about both of these two cases is that the loss of data or the exposure of credentials is completely authorized. The green box here, right? Employee was authorized to access data. The overwhelming majority of data breaches, and a breach is not necessarily a theft of data. It's just you exposed data and it got out somehow, is from authorized users. It's not often from an unauthorized user. It's pretty hard to get into a database if you're not authorized. It's possible, it's just not that common. It's far more common that you have an employee, a contractor, an application, or an API that has access to your data in a way that maybe it shouldn't have access to your data. What level of restrictions does it have? Point here is this is files. And the process we saw in those files, it was a 14-week period. And in that 14-week period, what we saw is a little bit of a test. On the first 6 weeks, we saw just a little bit of files, maybe 500 or so files. Then we saw it bounce up above 7,000. Then again, tried it again a few weeks later. Didn't get in trouble the first time, try it again, see what happens. And then, of course, a big blast out. Now, it could be that this was malicious. It could also be that this was an employee that gave his 2 weeks notice about right here and then left the company and took a lot of data. I can tell you, even at our own company, and we do watch a lot of this, even at our own company, people who access our customer resource manager that have names, addresses, and phone numbers of our customers, they can generate a report for a customer. They have to do their job. What they're not supposed to do is generate a report with 10,000 customer names and addresses and phone numbers on there. We would ask that would certainly raise a flag, and it would certainly cause us to ask a question, why did you do that? And in our normal red team process, we go to HR and we would say, has anything interesting going on? And we have had the case where they said, yes, they gave their 2 weeks notice, and yes, they downloaded all their customer list. You can define whether that's a problem in the country or not. The point here is When we start to look at how do you identify bad behavior, this isn't pictures of a GUI or anything, this is just analytics. But when we think about how do you identify bad behavior, one of the ways you do compare your bad behavior or behavior to a baseline, right? It's clustering and peering, standard machine learning. And in this case, this particular user was compared to other users. Other users hit along this line in terms of the size of data. This user accessed 4.4 million megabits of ultimately the data compared to other people. And even compared to this user themselves was 10 times the amount of volume that user would normally do. To be able to detect bad behavior, it requires a couple of things we're going to talk about. Number one, you have to know what you're looking for. You have to know your asset. You have to know that you have files, you have folders, you have databases, you have tables and columns and rows and other fun things. You have to recognize whether you have data that's important to your organization, important to your country, important to your region, whatever it happens to be, and what priority that data has. And then using all of that information, finally you get to something like this where you can say, okay, I know who's accessing my data, I know where my data is, I know the volume of data being accessed. Now I need to understand, should they be accessing this data in the way that they are? Not based on their rights and roles, because those are almost always wrong, but based on their behavior and their peers and the application's behavior is how you ultimately detect this. And we talk about roles and rights being wrong. Let's talk about, I'm going to caveat this before I have this conversation. DBAs, which I know a lot of you are DBAs or data scientists or big data experts. DBAs and all of the people I just mentioned are not bad people. You're good people, you really are. But you have a lot of power, you have a lot of credentials that have access to a systems, which means you're likely a primary target when it comes to somebody trying to get access to a system. And one of the ways we see systems used in many cases is rather than having a user and their job is to do a certain number of things and that is the only user they will ever use, more commonly in organizations, you have a DBA or a database user or a user on a data store of some kind. And in that world, that user is designed to execute a function. Backups, restores, logins, logouts, change control, data management, and otherwise. And you log into that user when you want to do that function or role. But it means there's not a lot of identification back to who really did that. There are ways to do it, but it becomes very problematic. And in these cases, what we identify is if I've got two databases and I've got two users, these users are actually sharing their accounts. I have user A using both blue and orange. I have user B using blue and orange, sharing their accounts. In this case, I've got C and D. By the way, this is a real customer, but C and D, they don't own an account. They're using these accounts over here, user B's account, if you will. User H is using G, and he's using E, also not his own account. J only uses G. K only uses, you get the idea. There's only one customer in this list that actually did anything right, and it was F. F only uses his ID, and he doesn't share that ID with anyone else. There can be a lot of reasons for all of this, but this is actually very, very common in many organizations that there's not a lot of identification or capability to go back and see who really accessed this data. Are they giving a 2-week notice? Are they leaving the company? Are they malicious? Are they compromised? All of these things come to play when we start to think about how do we track users and how do we understand users when we're thinking about data security, because users can be shared. At the end of the day, when we think about how do I protect my data, you have to be able to consider the things that are traditionally unknown. And what I mean by unknown is most organizations can't answer these questions, and they should be really simple questions to answer. How did the users connect to the data? Sometimes you can with access control, sometimes you can't. What data did they access? Are you monitoring just privileged operations? Are you monitoring selects and looking at data? Are you monitoring just some users but not other users? Being able to answer this question is a holistic question. They is everybody and everything. What did they access? Consider this question as we go through the entire presentation and consider whether or not you can answer the question in your own organization. What did blank, put your name here, do? What did Terry do? What did Terry do? In my organization, in the cloud, on-prem, in my old databases and my new databases, in my data warehouses, in my data stores, and everywhere else in my file servers, if you can answer the question, what did Terry do across this board here, and compare him to everything. At the end of the day, you really need to define really who it is. And this conversation isn't just about access control or who should have access or who shouldn't have access. It is who accessed that data regardless of what access they should or shouldn't have. So we're going to talk about some of the reasons why organizations continue to fail at this. I can tell you there are plenty of financial services organizations where I spend a lot of my time, highly regulated businesses, highly governed businesses, and highly targeted businesses that still fail at this every single day. We'll talk about some of the reasons why they fail. Some of it is under, some of it's on the organization. So let's first understand the technologies that exist along the path to data. And I'm sure I'll leave some off of here and you'll ask me, what about this, what about that? I get what I can on here. So there are outside threats. Cloud, WAF, API security, bot management, DDoS. These are the way people will access your applications. Doesn't matter what tools you have, but the fact is there are controls that sit out front of your applications, and your applications sit in front of your data. The reason you have applications is to give many, many different people many, many different ways to access your data to run your business. There are other tools as well along the path as we work our way all the way back ultimately to the data itself. Most organizations today are doing all of the things in the purple. You have something in the purple. Yes, network firewalls and DLP and IDP and all of the other types of tools that list out there. I know most of you may not be security engineers, but the fact is there's a lot of stuff that goes into the work to identify people and things that access your data. What I will tell you is most of the things that happen out here actually don't understand data in many cases. It wouldn't know a SQL query from MS SQL, from one from Oracle, from one from Informix, from a MapR query in a Hadoop environment. So the fact is the data itself has to be understood by the organization. And there are not just threats from the outside that come this direction, but there are, of course, threats from the inside. When we think about those threats from the inside, a lot of times when we think about, rephrase that, when we think about those threats from the outside, a lot of times the things we think about are the applications. The reason I put this up here is this discussion is not about applications, but this discussion is about security. And when we think about security, and particularly data security, applications come to play only in that almost everybody has an application tool of some kind to protect their applications, and it's well understood by their security department. It is designed to do one thing, and that is block and prevent threats to your applications, which is why I put in red all of these items. You can see attacks, 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 threats, attacks. Application security is all about attacks. I know because that's half business, but fact is it's easy to understand. I put this up here only to contrast it to data security. Data security is a lot of stuff. You're not supposed to be able to read the small words, so don't worry about in the back. You're not missing anything. But the point here is data security can be perceived as complex. It really can be. But if you really boil down data security into just three things, data security comes down to identifying bad behavior, which is the red over here on this side, being able to do it so that you can report on it to somebody who's telling you you have to do it, regulatory compliance, GDPR, German privacy law, LGBT in Brazil, whatever it is. The fact is compliance says you need to do it. Sometimes the result is this. If you're doing a good job of security, likely you have everything you need to answer the questions in compliance. So they work together anyway in tandem. But to get here, risk and priority is the third bucket in this piece. Risk and priority is what you see a lot, frankly, out here. If you hear of encryption vendors do discovery and classification. Discovery and classification. If you look at privacy products, they do discovery and classification. If you look at data security products like us, we do discovery and classification. Everybody can do discovery and classification because you can't begin security if you don't actually know where your assets are and be able to prioritize those assets in some way. All of the rest of the things that come along the way for data security are the things that make data security a little bit easier or a little bit more of an ecosystem. Meaning, if someone says, I'm going to secure my data, so I'm going to encrypt my data, that's a good idea. You should encrypt your data. But does that mean your data is secure? In my opinion, and it is my opinion only, but in my opinion, encrypting your data is a great idea if you can do it. But the reality is encrypting your data means that you are preventing unauthorized access to that data, but still completely allowing authorized access to that data. The people that are authorized to decrypt the data in encryption, well, they can decrypt the data so they can see the data. There's no security on that data for those authorized users. And if most authorized users or most breaches are from authorized users, you really haven't solved the problem. It's a good idea, but it's a part of an ecosystem. And encryption somewhere over here, you'll find it in here somewhere, over here somewhere. The point is encryption is a piece of a whole. Data security is usually designed and built as an ecosystem. You'll see a slide later on from Gartner, for example, and they're talking about, no longer talking about individual points of encryption and tokenization and anonymization and masking and monitoring, all the things. Now they're talking about platforms. They're talking about how do you bring everything together to go back to that core question, which is, what did Terry do? And if you can define what did Terry do, then you're doing a pretty good job, but that requires a little bit of an ecosystem. It's not one thing that's going to solve the problem for you. So let's talk a little bit about why we pick and choose. What I mean by that is, most organizations, and by most I mean like 99.999% of organizations, pick and choose what they're going to monitor for a number of reasons. They don't say, I'm going to monitor every single data store and file store in my entire environment. That would be a good idea, but most organizations just simply don't do it for a number of reasons. So let's talk about why. So we have mainframe. Legacy, you've been trying to get off a mainframe for 30 years, and you will still be on mainframe in 30 years. But that's fine, but it's still out there. But you have to support it. It's still important, still has private data. On-prem, many people are moving off of on-prem and moving to the cloud. Some people are moving back. Fact is, it's still a factor, it's still important, still has data, and of course, cloud is constantly evolving and doing everything we're talking about today. So let's talk about the first challenge that people have and the reason they fail. The first, and in my opinion, one of the primary reasons they fail is scale. And this is on the vendor, it's on us, it's our problem. The problem is that to be able to monitor all of these systems and the volume of data that you have, as a vendor, I have to be able to bring that data into my system. All of your logs, I have to bring it all in. If you have one database, I can monitor that no problem. If you have 36,000 databases like a major financial services organization in the UK does, how many of my devices are you going to need for me to store all of your logging for 3 to 7 years? It could be a lot of boxes. It can be challenging. Now, traditionally, this has been a scale issue. It has been a problem, and it's been a problem for many years. It might be for 36,000 databases, you might need 12,000 of a vendor's box. It's just not manageable. So you pick and choose. You say, well, I'm not going to do everything then. I'm just going to monitor a little bit what I have to. I'm going to monitor what compliance says I must. The other reason why is vendors, again, have limited coverage. They can't cover everything. Today, maybe you have a modern vendor. They're out there. They've got a great looking GUI. It's brand new. They've been in business for 2 years. And they support some of this. None of this, and certainly none of that. They've only been in business for 2 years. It's going to take some time. It's limited coverage. So as a consumer, you then ask yourself, so do I need to pick and choose? Do I only cover this? Or is it acceptable risk for me not to cover the other stuff? Another reason why we pick and choose, limited coverage. Lacks cloud or lacks legacy or back and forth. Lacks multi-cloud. It can be a challenge. And the last piece, and this is one I never forget to fix. These two guys are blue up here. You can't see it, but they're blue and everybody else is a black color. It's to show that there are only a very small number of people that have the skills to actually do data security. And let me give you a number. Go to LinkedIn. In LinkedIn, in quotes, if you type in network security, you'll find 1.5 million people that know network security. They're still hard to find, but 1.5 million people. If you go and type in quotes database security, you will find 36,000 people who even claim to be database security experts. And we all know on LinkedIn, you can divide whatever number you find by half, and those are the actual experts. The rest, maybe. But the point is it's hard to find people who already know this stuff. So where we found organizations is organizations have said, these are the problems we have. And this is a lot of research that we do. Why do major banks still have breaches? Why do massive telecommunications and other organizations and airlines and hotel chains and retail have breaches? Why does this still happen when they spend millions and millions of dollars on security every year? These are the reasons, and they've told us this is what would solve their problem. They're saying, if you did it with less stuff, if I didn't have to manage so much stuff, then I could probably do more. If you covered everything and I didn't need 3 vendors or 5 vendors, I could do more. Any data, anywhere, any kind of data. And if you helped me augment my staff, Maybe it's professional services, maybe it's through partners, maybe it's through an MSSP, or maybe it's through automation. But you've got to help me make my people smarter, because I'm not going to hire a data security expert. I'm just not going to find one. So how do I go about doing it? So data security is interesting in that you can send your data to a SOC all day long, to a security operating center. You can send your data to a SIM, a security and incident event management system. But the fact is when you think about structured query language, structured query to some people can look like a lot of different languages. Now, half of these are languages maybe most of you speak at least one of or two of here, at least three of, right? So this is the one I speak. I can't help you over here. But the point is they all pretty much say the same thing. John took a lot of records over here. Your SOC engineers, if this was a SOC and I sent this to your SOC and they spoke English, awesome. If I sent this to your SOC, which frankly, for most security operating centers, looks a lot like this, they don't understand it. If I send this to a SIM or this to a SIM, SIMs aren't going to understand the actual language that's happening. They might be able to pick some words out of it, but they can't understand really that these all created a table. And from that table, they dumped a lot of information into another table and did something with it. You have to be able to interpret the SQL that's happening underneath. Or if it's file servers, understand the CIFS or the NFS or whatever protocol it is that you're doing. So when we look and we translate this into technology, what we wind up looking at is we look at how do we take something that looks like structured query language, for those in the back, select star from accounts where account number is like 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm looking at count numbers that look like 1, 2, 3, 4 from what is probably a sensitive table, but a structured, just standard SQL doesn't tell me whether it's sensitive or not. It's just a query. It's going to do something. Being able to translate this, remember the ecosystem I talked earlier. When you think about a platform, that platform is saying, I need to discover your asset. I need to know there's a database. I need to classify that asset. Where do you have sensitive data? Maybe it's in account numbers. Ultimately, I need to watch all the activity happening so that when something happens, I have an answer. And here, when something happens, from the security side, yes, data, yes, classification, yes, track the monitor, track the behavior, but doing what do you do with that data? Doing something with that data is the critical piece. I can know who accessed my data, where they accessed it, how they accessed it, what they accessed, but I have to be able to answer the question, should they be accessing this data the way that they did? And this is what does it, right? It's Joe. He's human. It's from an IP address. He touched a database that I'm aware of. It's accounts table. It's classified as sensitive. He did a select, which is a view. He did it 50 times. There's 1.5 million records, and that's not normal based on all the other things we've seen Joe do and all the other things we've seen all of his peers, the applications and APIs do. That's just not normal. It's not something you can predict across a large organization. You can't create policies to predict every bad behavior that's going to happen. The only way this happens is through modern technology, using big data, using Mongo and other services to collect all of this data and ultimately wrap it into analytics so that you come out on the other side with something that is actually actionable by a security operations center, by somebody who is not a data security expert. Consider, if you didn't see this, and I just told you, you've got a user, he's accessing a lot of records, he accessed 1.5 million, I'm telling you it's unusual. A SOC engineer can understand that. They can look across different systems and they can go take action on it. If I just give you this, nothing happens. It just sits there and it's a waste of space. So let's take a look at Gartner. So Gartner came out, and with any analyst, right? Analysts, they do their research, they talk to a lot of customers. They don't test anything, but they do talk to a lot of customers. In 2020, there were technologies, database audit and protection, what you might know as DAM, database activity monitoring. Database access governance, file activity monitoring, looking at files, looking at databases. That's been changed by Gartner to say individual pieces really don't make sense anymore. It's not working, is what Gartner's saying. They're saying, number one, for where we are today, since COVID, you have to have multi-cloud. Most organizations are in multi-cloud. You have to have a data security platform, which is a system that brings all the tools you likely already have and includes the tools you don't have into one place so that you can go back and answer that question, what did Terry do? Now, a data security platform, just a generic data security platform, is likely going to have at least these things and may have more things in it. This is the list of things. I'll admit, we don't have all of these things. Most data security platforms don't have all of them, but they will partner with them. They will have integrations with these types of technologies that are out there. But this is the stuff that you will be looking for when you say, do I have data security? To answer, what did Terry do? What should Terry do it? You really do need this technology. You need all of that to work together to answer that question. And to cover it all, ultimately, I'm just going to read the blue items. You have to have and solve for that coverage problem. You can't say if you have 100 databases, you need to go buy 50 of my things. That's not going to work. That's not going to scale. You have to be able to say if you're going to have if you're going to have 100 databases, you need one thing, and you can add another 400 on top of it and still use the one thing. That's scale. And that's really where things have come over the last 5 or 10 years, is cover everything. Support any type of data, structured, unstructured, semi-structured, doesn't matter. The goal of organizations that come to us have said, I know there's lots of vendors out there, but I don't want lots of vendors. I want one place to come, leverage the technology I have. Even if you already have what's called database activity monitoring, usually a platform will take whatever vendor it is you have and load it straight into the system. It doesn't matter who you have. Point is these are the cases that you'll need. Now this is one screenshot of our product. I don't think there's another one, so it's just one screenshot. Ignore the screenshot, don't worry about it. The point is when you look at these kinds of ecosystems, what we're looking at is the ability to track everything across clouds. Ali Cloud, Huawei Cloud, Oracle Cloud can be included in this list. This is just making the point. Clouds have to be out there. You have to be able to cover the cloud. You also have to be able to cover on-prem. Traditionally on-prem, if any of you have ever done database activity monitoring, you needed to use what's called an agent. You had to put an agent on your database to monitor that database, if it's a database you're monitoring. Sometimes a file server as well. That's still possible, even with our product and with other products. But where we're seeing this industry go is move toward agentless more commonly. Agentless is where you turn on logs, but you don't need an agent. It's a lot easier, but it requires you to turn on your logs. Some databases you can turn on your logs. Some databases you can't. It's why when you look at these types of technologies, it's why these agents still exist. Agents don't require you to turn on logs. The point is logs, and this is about getting data. It's about having visibility. It's the prison guard that says, I know that over here there's supposed to be people out here playing in the yard. I know over here there's people that are supposed to be in their cell. But I need to watch everything that happens because I need to see the person jumping over the fence. I can't just be looking at the 2 places these people are supposed to be. I need to look everywhere they could be. Okay, so we have a lot of support. So there's lots of support out there. I think the big key piece when we think about support of these types of technologies, as I said earlier, is supporting everything. Notice this big list up here, database as a services. There are vendors, there's lots of vendors out there that can do database as a service. If you're cloud only and you have nothing on-prem, you have nothing mainframe, nothing legacy, it's all in the cloud, you actually have a lot of options when it comes to vendors, because there are a lot of vendors that can handle the cloud. As you move down and you say, I still have stuff on-premise that's in scope. I have file servers that's on-premise. I have S3 buckets, whatever happens to be in the cloud. Then you're starting to say, all right, now I need a technology that can cross that hybrid boundary. I need that technology. And now your number of vendors actually start to shrink quite a bit because the on-prem is actually a lot more complicated. I've talked about ecosystem. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on ecosystem since I'm just about at time. Last slide. So in the last slide here, all I'm talking about is scale. If you have ever dealt with database activity monitoring, a company even like Imperva, that's what we have done in the past, that's what we still do today. If you've ever dealt with this type of technology or a competitor of ours, this is what your environment most likely looks like. If you're this big, this is about 1,800 or so databases, and you have all of this stuff, as I said. Things have changed. Just realize one of the takeaways here before the true takeaway of the last slide, the true last slide, now that I remember it, is the fact that scale has been really revisioned, really changed significantly to where it might have taken hundreds of things before, now it's down to one piece. And that is the use of things like big data and data warehouses, where traditionally data warehouses were not used in data security. Now today they are, and it's really ramped that scale. So I'll leave you with this last slide and I'll leave it up. Ask yourself these questions and be truly honest with yourself. The only one that needs a caveat here is where specifically is your private data located? As I said, almost every vendor in security will do discovery of your assets and classification of your assets. And that's an important one. If you're not even doing that, you're definitely behind in terms of being able to do this. But being able to do this is not asking yourself, do you know where your private data is? all of you know where your private data is. It's asking you, is it possible that your private data could be anywhere else other than where you expect it to be? That's what this question is asking. Do you really know where all of your private data is? And then going down further into it, who accessed it, how did they access, should they access, which users accessed it, are they accessing it appropriately? If you can truly answer this question, not just on your personal information, not just on your PCI information, but across the board of all your information, which is security, not compliance, then you're probably in a pretty good position. If not, then we have a booth and we can chat with you and do what you want to. There's probably other people out there that can do it as well. I haven't looked at the whole list, but we would love to have a conversation with you. So this takes me to time. Usually I can ask for questions. I can, but how much time do I have? It says finish, so that's fine. But we have a booth. I'll be outside if you have questions. The last group didn't have any questions. I'm always happy to answer them. I'll be outside. Thank you all. Appreciate it.